Hello YouTube, it's Shadow Hero 90, welcoming you to my show, Sexism in Movies and TV, where I expose and rip apart the gynocentric and misandric trash on mostly Western TV. For the most part, the films and shows that are really guilty of bashing men and doing nothing else, in fact, these franchises almost take pride in it, well, they mostly come from either the United States or Canada. The positive male role models on Japanese TV are out in full display, unlike here in the United States, where most of them are either hidden away or covered up, never appear on screen, or are just 100% cucked to make the female Mary Sue characters look good by comparison. Which, for the record, if you have to make a male character look bad to make the Mary Sue female character look good, then she isn't a good character at all. Now, there are tons of reasons as to why I do this show. One of which is, well, it's kind of easy to assume the fact that shows and movies like the ones I attack in this series are responsible for the fact that both men and young boys in this day and age have such low self-esteem. And a newer reason that I mentioned is the fact that no good male role models are on TV anymore. And in movies, they basically get cucked to make the girl characters look good, which ties into the whole young men and boys have such low self-esteem issue that I brought up. Yes, because they are horrible characters. The men have to be made to look weak and or dumb to make these characters look good. And that's something I wanted to, bring up. And that's the fact that these girl power characters are all terrible role models. Well, on the other hand, all of the female characters who could be seen as good role models for girls are usually, limited to anime for the most part. Most fictional characters that girls see on TV that they would want to emulate are basically horrible characters. Not saying they're horribly written, I'm just saying they're horrible people. And outside of some of these characters, a lot of little girls want to grow up to become pop stars, and that is an occupation that requires whoever's doing the job to dress like a prostitute. And having given you reasons as to why I do this show, which amounts to the fact that feminist Hollywood will hurt everyone, the episode will now begin. Okay, in this episode, I'm going to be ripping apart the Kids Next Door episode, Operation Lizzie. The last time I tackled this show was when I went after the episode where the villain was a genocidal maniac, but because of her gender, she got let off the hook. If that episode had been about a boy trying to get rid of all girls, well, I'm just gonna say it. The villain would have been beaten by a girl, and he probably would have been either killed or enslaved. To be frank, the idiots who write these shows have a lot of biases, especially when it comes to men. But in this episode, I will be tackling the episode Operation Lizzie, the first appearance of number one's girlfriend Lizzie, and one that kinda portrays her as an absolute bitch. And yes, this will be that type of episode. The one where I give you a quick overview of what the episode's about, and then I tell you everything wrong with it. And with that aside, let's begin ripping into this piece of shit. The kids next door are at a carnival. Number one's girlfriend Lizzie got him a present, a Yes Dear 5000, a helmet that, well, it's a mind control helmet that she intends to use to control number one like a puppet as it slowly fuses with his brain, and he fights his friends, and they eventually do smash the mind control helmet before it fully takes over his brain and fuses with it. But then number one and Lizzie remain together at the end of the episode. Okay, in this episode, Lizzie took the term controlling bitch to a completely new level in an extremely disgusting way, as you can see here. And she got no consequences to her actions. You're probably wondering, well, how can this get any worse? i.e. Operation Snowing. Blah blah blah, yada yada yada. Empire Strikes Back parody. This guy is shown to be evil, and he actually converted a Yes Dear 5000 to work on a female brain so that he could try doing to Lizzie what she was gonna do to number one. And ironically, this works is more or less karma. She's getting karma for what she tried to pull. So this boy doesn't really come off so much as a villain, but a misunderstood anti-hero. But the episode would disagree with you on that. He says that he's evil, and yeah, Star Wars parody, and then him and number one come to blows. Said force of karma does end up getting, well, somewhat arrested, or metaphorically arrested, but ends up dating his assistant, who was the accomplice to his crimes, if you could even call them crimes. In a weird way, Lizzie is kind of like a younger, gender-swapped version of this jerk. A character that did not go over well with the people who watched the show, and a lot of which say he did not deserve a redemption arc, and should have been kicked off the show after he tried to brainwash this one girl into dating him. Because, yeah, to be blunt, this kind of thing has been around since Saved by the Bell, but when a character decides to use mind control to make the popular girl date him, he is no longer a good character, and by no way could be seen as a protagonist. And despite what television would say in the early to mid-2000s, everything I said about that Disney jerk I just mentioned applies to Lizzie too. Not to mention the fact that she did it in a way that was a lot creepier and a lot grosser. So in other words, if this guy actually managed to come out on top in the episode Operation Snowing, that episode would have actually had a purpose, as he would have been a force of karma, giving a deranged sociopath a taste of her own medicine and what she rightfully deserves. Now here's the weird thing about the character President Jimmy. He calls himself evil, but he's not really that evil. I mean, he basically acts as a force of karma, doing to Lizzie what she did to number one. And yeah, he did manage to win in the end, or at least get an actual relationship out of this. But in all fairness, Jimmy dodged a bullet, as Lizzie is horrid. You know, it's clear as crystal that no one who wrote for this show really knows how morality works outside of Kids Next Door, the movie. Because here's the thing. Despite calling himself evil, and this episode trying to show President Jimmy as the villain, he's not really a villain. But then again, this is Kids Next Door, a show about kids who are terrorists. And that's not me looking too deeply into this. People assume that this is an organization of spies and that's what these kids are supposed to be, but no, they are terrorists. I mean, think of any terrorist organization, and the Kids Next Door would more or less qualify as a terrorist group. Well, I mean, they fight for an ideology. They are more than willing to get violent, which, yeah, using force or acts of violence in the name of an ideology is practically is a very good definition of the word terrorism. Allegedly, the kids next door fight for the rights of kids, or to help kids not get in trouble. It depends on who's writing the script. But in reality, this group of brats are basically just a terrorist organization. They're ageist, they hate anyone who's age 13 or over, and their hatred towards anyone who is older than 12 is their ideology. And just like I said before, acts of destruction in the name of an ideology is practically a textbook definition of the word terrorism. Yeah, in one of the early episodes, they launched an attack on a skating rink, basically out of paranoia. None of the teenagers did anything to provoke the attack. It was basically a misunderstanding that was fueled by, well, paranoia. And then there was the time that they let a mental patient, this guy here, loose in an office building because the office building had a dress code. You know, in all fairness, this show set a really bad example for a lot of kids. It glorifies terrorism, and with the example that I just gave you, no, these are not spies. The kids next door are a group of terrorists. Like the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, which it did have a crossover with, because the creators were good friends, Kids Next Door is something that had potential, but was, well, for the most part, horribly executed, and they try to put a lot of the wrong people in the moral right. Well, 9 times out of 10, that's the case. The Kids Next Door movie, Operation Zero, was one of the few times where the kids next door were actually heroic. Hell, based on what we know about the potential sequel series, the guy who created the show actually, well, I'm pretty sure he heard the same criticism I just spewed out, and actually expanded upon it by making number 1 the villain should the sequel series ever get made. I'm just gonna end this review by saying Operation Lizzie was a complete piece of crap. She's a deranged, controlling villain, and yeah, the one attempt they had at giving her consequences to her actions really blew up in the writers' faces.